Hi, I'm John Mancini, and welcome to Industry Perspectives, where I talk about people and processes and technologies. Hi, I'm John Mancini, and I'm here with my friend Brian Tuemmler from Infotection.com, and we're here to talk about a recent series that he had on his blog entitled Master Classification, and it's all about auto classification and what it means for folks. And I thought I'd start out with 5 unconventional questions because I hate conventional introductions. So number 1, best book that you read the last year?
That's a good question. So I think the best book was probably the IAPP certification study guide on classification. No, I'm sorry, I'm kidding. That's not true. Probably, I think Salt, Fat, Acid, Heat has been really impactful on just the way I live my life and what I eat. And I think that's a classy book. I like that book a lot.
Second question, if I probed into your playlist that you listen to when you work, what would be the song that people would be most surprised to find on there?
So a little bit of background. First of all, I'm a saxophone player. I play all different types, but I love the bari sax. And one of the best saxophone solos.
Holy moly, wait a minute. I didn't know this. We are both bari. I was a bari sax player too.
Awesome.
Yeah. Go ahead.
I didn't know that either. Yeah. So one of my favorite solos is from a guy named Ronnie Ross at the very end of Walk on the Wild Side by Lou Reed. That song is a lot different than a lot of the other songs that I have, but I love that solo so much that it's often my ringtone as well. So
cool. Weird kindred spirits I didn't know about. Your favorite COVID TV binge?
So COVID is kind of an interesting thing for us right now because I've got 2 daughters that are back from their work and college lives, and they've already binge watched everything that I want to watch. So I can only go so far before they go, I've already seen this, and they have to leave. So we have to sort of negotiate what we binge watch. I would say I've enjoyed Queen's Gambit most, but I haven't made it through yet. So hopefully we'll get
very good. Yeah, we enjoyed that too. First place you want to go once you can travel again?
Oh, there's a good question. So I'm not sure it's up to me. I think I'm the kind of person that whatever country will let me in is where I want to go. And it might be a while before Americans can go anywhere. So under that definition, it might be Canada. I don't know. If I really had my choice, I think Argentina and Portugal are high on my list of places to go next.
Oh, interesting. And then last intro question, not naming any actual names because I don't want you or I to get into trouble. But what's the most annoying thing you've ever heard from either a vendor or a user in your career?
So this is one I'm actually going to claim credit for having said myself. So it's an easy thing to do. And I think it might tie into this conversation later as well, because very often from the vendor community, one of the problems that we have always had is to say, here's what my product does from a functional perspective. And people are always complaining, you need to talk about benefits. Why is that functionality a benefit? And sometimes people get to the point where they talk about the benefits, but they don't talk about what the actual functionality is. And that to me, it just sounds really empty and frustrating at times when that happens. So it's a bit like, we provide happiness. We make your lives faster, better, cheaper, but how? So I think that's probably one of the dumbest things I've seen over the years. And I know that I do that as well, so.
Great. Good transition to, we're here to talk about auto classification. So give me a definition of auto classification that even a CEO can understand.
So honestly, in my life, what I see auto classification is taking the things that people do in a corporate environment from structured content that they do for their own personal organizational benefits and raising that to the level of adding value to the corporation. So instead of just talking about benefits there, I'm going to go a little bit more into the functionality. I do. So when we create content as individuals, a lot of what we're doing is adding names and folder structures and numbering conventions and acronyms and nicknames and templates and all kinds of, hiring good people to write consistent content. There's all kinds of things we do to make our lives more repeatable and understandable on a day-to-day basis. But very rarely does that stuff add value to the corporate level, where we're also trying to do things like records management and risk and mergers and acquisitions and litigation response. All of those things very much benefit from the fact that we've done this organization. It's just that when you look at it from the outside, you don't see that. And I think that's where auto classification comes in, to try and make that stuff visible to the executive level and make it valuable.
That's a good definition. I think, we've always had this problem in this space of, sort of the bottom up kind of, we try to do these things and try to explain them from the point of view of the priorities that the C-level is trying to push down. And, I think, we've always been of the belief that these are, inextricably tied, but
Yeah.
in most organizations, they need a little help connecting those dots, I think.
You're absolutely right. I think, a lot of people, if you ask them what information is in your, big farm of legacy SharePoint sites or big collections of shared drives, the answer is it's garbage. It's a mess. It's a landfill. We don't know what's there. And that's true for those people at that level. They don't know what's there because it's a detailed, focused kind of thing. But if you can extract that and find the patterns and find the things that are why it is what it is and bring that bubble up to the surface, I think that's really where the value is.
So tell me why you think auto class is particularly important right now at this point in time.
One of the big motivations for me, for a lot of organizations that we're talking to, is the movement to the cloud. When you move stuff to the cloud, you can be more comprehensive about how you deal with it and how you organize it, and you're not stuck on a lot of the traditional platform level issues that kept that from happening. But more than anything, I think, is you're actually touching the content and you're moving it. Don't just move it from here to here, but move it because it's valuable, and classify it along the way and extract what you can from it, so that when it gets in its destination and it sits there, it's adding much more value than it ever did where it was. So I think the overall movement in the industry towards the cloud is a big motivator for where auto classification is, and that how all that's tying together. The cloud, it's just sort of, it is being prompted a lot by the COVID, by the fact that we're away from our visibility into shared drives. You can't see what's there. You can't see all of your other corporate data. You can't talk to other people. So what you have to do is rely more heavily on what is presented to you and how is it organized and what value is being added along the way. And I think that's so the COVID actually, I think, is prompting some of it, although it was happening before COVID as well. But I think
that question about the cloud is really interesting, I think, because it also prompts people to maybe think of this in less of a big bang mentality and more of a incremental, as you touch content, improve it, classify it, categorize it, but don't think you're going to undo 30 years worth of crap, in one fell swoop. It's just not going to happen. So you write in your master classification blog about 3 varieties or categories or classes of classification. Talk to me a little bit about each of those.
Yeah, so I think, once again, this is stepping back, looking at the overall functionality that's out there, trying to get a holistic view of what capabilities are out there. We tend to classify things into buckets, and these are 3 different sets of buckets that I think are useful. The first bucket is basically trying to identify what is that piece of content. So it's an invoice, it's a contract, it's an email, it's a something, but it's at the document level. Once you've identified that level of classification, what is it? Then you can do all kinds of other things, hopefully tying it to retention schedules and security models and mergers and acquisition definitions and all the other stuff that goes along with it. But identifying what it is, I think, is the first big logical one. The next one, once you've identified it, then you can start extracting data out of it. So putting metadata on content. So first one is, what type is it? Secondly is, which one of that type is it, and provide some context around it. And metadata, when you put that on content, allows you to group things and cluster things and integrate things. You can then apply retention because you know what the contract invoice number is, which is tied to a payment system somewhere. So now you can do event-based retention because you've got that metadata. The third one is a little more amorphous than that, but it's basically saying risk and value. So we have a tendency to have, in organizations, from a security perspective, private, public, company confidential, some cases top secret, in some cases other things. A lot of those are really useful. They're not based on the content type or the metadata. They're more like, what value does this piece of content have to the organization? I would add to that, when you get to if you're going to go do those classifications, also identify stuff that is garbage. What can we also get rid of? So don't just focus on the important stuff, but focus on the unimportant stuff. What stuff out there, if you're going to be doing, for example, content that might have personally identifiable information in it, Also look at content that you know will never have personally identifiable information in it. And then you can leave that out of processing if you're going down this path. So part of it is looking at what you have and what's valuable. Part of it is looking what's not valuable. So those are the three types of what does it have in it so I know what to do with it? And then what value does it have to the organization and how can I leverage that?
Yeah, I really like that sort of three-headed beast approach to thinking about this because, too often I think people say like, oh, well, geez, how hard can this be? Just do a full text search of everything and you'll know immediately what category it fits in. And in the posts, you talk a little bit about, just take something like a full text search for invoice, for example. Well, that can be an invoice, which is a type of content. It can be a reference to an invoice in a letter to something. It could, it can be something that goes to somebody that has personally identifiable information. All those different ripples. And so, those three dimensions, I think, really become important to having a good strategy to address all this.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, last question. Give me, based on the experience that you've had both at Infotection and then also, I mean, you've been doing this for a long time, like I have. Give me a sense of, one piece of advice that you'd have for people that are thinking about these technologies. And if it drifts into more than one, that's okay.
Yeah. So actually, one topic that I find under discussed that I would leave out there as something to think about is the value and purpose of a lot of the stuff that we do in auto classification is about consistency. Because one of the things that happens is you've created a little black box and you put a piece of content into it and it spits out the other side as something. And if you don't know how and why it got to be that something, you start questioning it and you have problems with it. As a real, probably bad example, but good example, to do a duplicate analysis, you're finding all the duplicates that are out there. You might find 10 copies of your organizational charter document for your organization, the most important piece of content out there, and there's 10 copies of it. I'm going to take 9 of them and say, those are garbage because they're duplicates. You don't need 9 copies of it. If I take that duplicate and I give it to the CEO and I said, here, we found some garbage, he's going to look at that and say, that's our founding document. How can you say that's garbage? It's because he doesn't necessarily know what was the rule set that got him to understand that piece of content was actually not needed because it's duplicate. And that's happened a lot in the conversations is, how did this get to be here? Why is this piece of content either valuable or not valuable? Is it matching some PII that I didn't know? Is it doing so? Consistency is a big part of what my takeaway is. If you can classify the content in your M365 environment the same way that you're classifying it on your shared drives or on your other locations where content may be residing in your legacy ECM systems, building consistent rules helps you overcome a lot of that angst down the road. And so I'm looking at, 2 years down the road when you've done this stuff already, you're still in your project mode, you're still classifying stuff. And then the one other thing that ties into that very carefully, which I think is worth thinking about for everybody that's trying to get into auto classification, is the difference between content at rest and content in motion.
Oh, yeah.
Right. And so the idea is, as you're creating it, you have not yet put it into a folder. You haven't created it with a create date. You haven't determined its ownership or decided what time it was done or any of the other context generally that happens. So you can't leverage those things from an auto classification perspective. Once you've saved it, you can do all that stuff. But over here, while it's still a document being created, you're much more concerned with what activities am I prompting by doing this? It's what email systems am I allowed to use? Can I send it this way? Can I send it that way? Can I protect it? So there's a whole different set of criteria and context around how you classify something when it's data in motion, which is where a lot of, I think, the M365 governance capabilities are geared towards, is day-to-day point forward activities. And how do you make sure you're doing them right? Whereas looking at legacy content, it's about, this has already happened. What can we extract? What can we trust? What can we not trust? And it's already done. But I think consistency between those two worlds is probably one of the things that's going to save your butt quite a number of times down in the future when you're trying to figure out how to explain how we got to this point.
And I think that consistency point is a really good tie back to where you first started talking about how you explain this to the CEO. Yes. Because if you don't understand how important consistency is, if you don't understand how consistency is achieved, and if you don't understand how consistency can be better generated by machines often than it can be by just somebody looking at a piece of paper,
Yeah.
you're going to tend to doubt the results. And then that defeats the whole purpose in the first place.
Yeah. And I think, people worry a lot about accuracy in this process. And I think if you're going to be categorizing, classifying 100 million documents, you're more concerned with good intentions and reasonable effort and as opposed to accuracy,
and good process.
And good process, because then you can go back and explain why you did what you did. Whereas if you let individuals do their own processing, you get a lot of different answers. If you let a machine do it, you get a consistent answer. It may be sometimes wrong, but at least you know why, and you can fix it and you can improve upon it.
So I've been here today talking with Brian Tuemmler from infotection.com about his recent blog series on master classification. And Brian, thanks a bunch. It's been fun. So here are my 5 takeaways from my conversation with Brian. First of all, vendors who only talk about their technology rather than the benefits it gives potential customers are making a big mistake. But an equal mistake is erring so far on the side of benefits that are abstract and high level and sound like the technology equivalent of achieving world peace. Focus on the connection between the why and the how in talking to potential customers. Second takeaway, if you ask most organizations what is on their shared drives, they're going to say garbage. But if you really understood what was in those digital landfills, you would find there is value and risk hidden away in them. Number 3, when migrating information from on-premise to the cloud, don't just move it. If you touch it, use this as an opportunity to improve it and cull it and categorize it and add value to it. Number 4, the value of what we do in classification is often underappreciated. It is consistency, which is critical to demonstrating process integrity, especially if you wind up in a legal context. And then 5th, strive to answer 3 questions about content as you seek to classify it. What is it? What is its context? And what is its value or risk? Again, on behalf of Industry Perspectives, thank you for your time.